Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you listen to this program any length of time, you know that we've talked about an organization called Forward Women. I'll talk more about that in just a minute, but we've had various individuals associated with that organization, and we are privileged to have in studio here in this first hour the founder and executive director, Diane Paddison, an individual that has a Harvard MBA and has been a global executive for 2 Fortune 500 companies. In the past, we've talked about her book, Work, Love, Pray, and also there is a new devotional we'll talk about a little bit later, Be Refreshed. And Forward is really a faith-based community trying to empower and inspire women in the workplace, and it is a fascinating organization. We have a link to their website, also some articles we've posted, and Diane, welcome back to Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. It's so wonderful to be here and just see what's going on with Point of View.
Well, and you see our new studio, so it turned out pretty well, didn't it?
It's beautiful.
Yes, well, and it's been way too long. The fact that we've been in the studio for a year and you've not been here, although we've had one of your associates here, it says we needed to get you back in. And for our listeners who might say, I'm not sure I've ever heard of that organization, can you give us a little background?
Sure. Well, Kerby, as you mentioned, I was in the C-suite of a couple Fortune 500 companies and just felt alone. I was the only woman in that place. I think churches have sometimes struggled to know how do they incorporate women with the leadership skills. Third, I knew I needed community amongst women like me. Fourth, I saw a need for helping other women have confidence. And then the statistics that support it around women who are getting degrees today, the percent of women that are now primary breadwinners, the percent of women with children under 18 in the workplace, all those had gone about 30 percentage points in my lifetime. And I thought, there's a real need. I'm going to see if someone out there is doing this. And when I checked, there was nobody really focusing on the woman in the workplace and providing them with a faith-based community. And so that was the beginning of Forward.
Well, again, we recognize in the scriptures, Titus 2 talks about older women discipling and mentoring younger women, and certainly that is something that does happen inside the churches. And I've jokingly said that whenever I have a man in here talking about men's ministry, the women's ministry is always doing very well. The men's ministry isn't doing so well. But even so, a woman in the church who is a homemaker may not be able to relate as well to some of the struggles and challenges a woman in the workplace faces. And then you might say, well, then I also, in the workplace, I need mentors. Well, a lot of them are men, and you've had men that have been helpful to you as well. But again, let's be honest, a man is probably not going to understand some of the challenges of a woman. So you meet a need. And it's amazing to me that even though I was around when you got this started, it's like, why wasn't this around decades ago? But I just, again, think that that's really what you're trying to do, meet a need that obviously is a very significant need if we're going to help these women in the workforce.
Exactly. I mean, it just amazes me, and God gets all the glory for this, that we have 150,000 women now that are coming to Forward and involved in some way.
Yes, and again, we have a link to the website, and it's the number 4, 4wordwomen.org. But you don't even have to remember all that because we have a link there as well. And it has some information, obviously. And just for a minute, let me also mention your earlier book came out in 2011, Work, Love, Pray. And, of course, that's also on your website there as well. This is just a great resource, which, first of all, tells your story, which is really a powerful story as well in terms of successes, failures, challenges, opportunities, and the rest. And it really kind of set the tone for this. So that book's still available as well, right?
Right. It's available.
And again, we have a link on the website to that. This new one, which is Be Refreshed, we'll come back to that a little bit more in just a minute in terms of a year-long devotional for women. But I've already talked about this idea of mentoring, and there are a couple of articles. Let me take this one. We sometimes interview some of the people with the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics. And you wrote an article, and I remember reading it. Now, that's pretty good because I have pretty good memory. It goes back to March of a year ago. But you've said that this particular article, Working Women Are Leaving the Church, Here's How to Bring Them Back, was really maybe the most popular article they've ever had?
Yes, at the end of 2017, they shared with us it was their most popular article in their history.
And what it starts out with is I felt invisible. I manage a multi-million-dollar portfolio, but when I offered to help with the finances in the church, the finance committee never responded. Part of the problem is the churches sometimes don't know what to do with people. If they've been through a divorce, it's like, okay, where do we put our divorced people? You know, if they're single and they've been single all their lives, I don't want to put them in the college group, you know. And so you've seen that. And as a person that's taught at seminary, I recognize that sometimes the churches are way behind understanding some of those issues. But here is a good example of the church not recognizing that you have a really significant pool of talented women who have leadership skills, who have financial skills, who have managerial skills, marketing skills, and you're not using them in an effective way.
Right, right. We actually heard specifically from a CFO who said she offered to help with the capital budgeting committee, and they didn't bring her in, but they brought in a residential real estate broker who is a man.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, we can recognize some of the bias there and also maybe the blindness, but you have a suggestion here that there are some things that you can do to bring women back. And one of those is to obviously recognize that they do have busy schedules. But in just a few minutes, we're going to talk about the other one, bringing mentors, because there is just, again, something which is in Scripture, but we don't apply it all the time. So talk about that.
Yeah. Well, these women are really wanting to learn from other women who really do put God first in their life and who prioritize relationships and who are in the workplace so that they can really help each other understand how to navigate. And it's really amazing to me to see how God has used this mentoring through Forward, because basically it has impacted these women spiritually. It's impacted them relationally, where they've grown and deepened their relationships, and it's impacted them professionally, where they've grown in their leadership skills, but they've also learned how to match their gifts with the work they do.
Well, and again, when we come back from the break, I do want to talk about this idea of mentoring for just a few minutes. And you have a deadline coming up. When is that? Because that's going to be important.
Right. The Class 20 deadline is January 11th to apply.
So again, we wanted to encourage some of you to, first of all, go to the website and you'll see some opportunities that exist there. But again, Forward connects, leads, and supports Christian women in the workplace to really help them achieve their God-given potential with confidence. And that's an important part of mentoring because, as you said, they really kind of need to know what their gifts are. And I have found that sometimes we discover our spiritual gifts, we discover some of our strengths and weaknesses by somebody else looking at us. We think that we would be the best person to evaluate what we can do and what we should do. But oftentimes it's somebody else that comes up and says, you know, I think you'd be really good at that. And I've told story after story on this program over the years of individuals that got into writing, broadcasting, got into positions of leadership, even decided to go in the ministry because somebody gave them some encouragement. And we're going to talk about this mentoring program, but we need to take a break. This would be a good time for you to go to forwardwomen.org. That's the number 4. We have a link on our website, pointofview.net. We'll continue with Diane Paddison right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one song we often sing during the Christmas season is What Child Is This? William Chatterton Dix wrote the lyrics in 1865 when he was an insurance company manager and been struck by a severe illness. After a spiritual renewal in his life, he wrote a number of hymns, and this one was set to the tune of the traditional English folk song Greensleeves. What child is this who laid to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, while shepherds watch are keeping? This is Christ the King, whose shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him laud, the babe, the Son of Mary. This hymn then asks who this child is that was found by the shepherds not in a palace but in a manger. Why lies him in such a mean estate where ox and donkeys are feeding? And the next verse reminds us that Jesus is essentially born a peasant king. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh. Come, peasant king, to own him. The King of kings salvation brings, let loving hearts enthrone him. Raise a song on high, the virgin sings her lullaby. Joy, joy, for Christ is born, the babe, the Son of Mary. While shepherds must have wondered who was born in a manger, this verse reminds us that the wise men apparently believed him to be royalty and brought him gifts. Both shepherds and the wise men had access to baby Jesus because he wasn't born in a palace that would have guards and bureaucratic protocols. Isn't this a great picture for us today? All of us have access to Jesus and merely need to place our trust and faith in him. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have Diane Paddison in studio with us today. Again, founder and executive director of Forward Women. And again, we have a link to that website, 1-800-351-1212, if you would like to join the conversation. But I suspect most of you just want to sit back, pay attention, take some notes, and also go to the website, because we are talking now for just a few minutes, if we could, about this idea of mentoring. And again, any kind of mentoring that you can receive in the business world is good. And I know you've had men over the years that have been able to help you and give you some direction. And I know you've been able to pass that on to others. But no one who could better understand what it is like to be a woman in the workforce than another woman who's actually been plowing that particular path for many years, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. When you've walked in that person's shoes, it's much easier to relate and understand.
So one of the things that you have here also is a nice kind of summary of some of the things that are taking place. But talk about what this mentoring program is. We've got a deadline coming up in January. And also, I've got at least one caller that wants to talk about her testimony of being in the mentoring program. So we'll get to that in a minute. But give us some basics before we take one of those phone calls.
Great. Well, we have the mentee and mentor apply.
Mm-hmm.
So, and pray over those matches. So we match those women well together, and then they go through a series of 5 sessions. So it's personal vision statement, your goals around your spiritual, relational, and professional. And then the next 3, you really dive into an action plan around your spiritual, professional, and relational goals. And then you end with the final call with the entire class so that you can learn from each other and how God's used it to impact each other's life. So It's just one of my favorite calls every quarter is to hear that final call of our mentor classes.
Well, and again, it's certainly biblical because the Apostle Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ, the same kind of thing. And I talked about Titus 2, and we should be doing that. And I'm not saying that churches aren't. I mean, there are a lot of programs which I'm aware of, older women mentoring younger women. But Diane, one of the things I've noticed is I especially, since later on today even, we're going to be talking about the millennial generation because this new book out by Grant Skeldon deals with that. But I have found that a lot of the younger generation, that would be the Generation Y, millennials, even now the Generation Z, the iGen generation, they want to be mentored. Mm-hmm. It's the difficulty finding the mentors, isn't it?
Right. And that's really the reason why we designed it to be a 6-hour commitment, because we have amazing mentors. I mean, we have Nancy Lowy, who used to be the CFO of Kimberly-Clark. Mm-hmm. We've had the CFO of American Airlines. We really want to bring in mentors that really have that experience that can really help these women in a real practical way.
Let's, if we can, hear a testimony, if that's okay with you. And we'll go to the state of Colorado, I believe. Julie, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Diane Paddison.
Thanks for taking my call. I heard you all on today and was super excited because I just got off a call with my mentor through Forward Mentoring. I'm in this current class, and I heard about it from this radio program probably 4 or so months ago, and so ended up calling and getting involved, which has been really wonderful. And my motivation was my husband and I have been in Christian camping for over 20 years, and I work with lots and lots of young adults and college age. I do a lot of mentoring myself. Feel like there is not as many mentors and lots of potential mentees, and have just really enjoyed and grown from the relationship with the woman that I was matched with.
Well, again, so you're in camping, but talk about some of the benefits that you got from it. Obviously, you've already alluded to some, but are some others that you might want to mention before we move on?
Yeah, it's what could seem like an arbitrary process, and I think it's not when you're matched with a mentor. I've never met my mentor. She lives in Georgia, and I'm in Colorado. But it's very clear that God's hand was on that matching process, and just the skills and the heart. I'm not necessarily in a typical career-driven type of a woman in the work world. It's very ministry, and I live in unique places that most people wouldn't live because I'm at camp. But yet the way that God has used her and her skills in coaching and mentoring and her heart for the Lord, which is, I needed someone that could get why I do what I do and some of the challenges. And so I've just been really blessed by it. And I'm looking at maybe ways to start some more intentional mentoring between women in the camping ministry around the country.
Well, outstanding. And again, Christian Camping International is an organization I certainly have supported over the years and speak at Christian camps. So glad to hear that story. And thank you so very much for taking a moment to share a little bit more of the mentoring program for Forward Women.
Yes, thank you, Julie. We hear what you just said all the time. I just had a woman pull me aside and drip coffee and said, "Are you Diane Paddison? I want to tell you about my experience." And her name is Natalie, and I'm meeting with her next week. But she shared how her mentor, Mary, helped her go way beyond what she could have ever imagined.
Julie, appreciate your phone call today. Thank you for calling in.
Thanks for having me. I hope other women take advantage and maybe take the step of faith to go, maybe I could benefit from this. And I really think there's power in women coming alongside women. And so I hope that happens with lots of women.
Well, thank you. And there's a good illustration. Heard the program with one of your associates, actually, and said, well, maybe I'll sign up. And that one is not as typical, but that illustrates the fact that some of the listeners might say, well, I'm not in a corporate 500 company, or I'm not in a Fortune 100 company, and so I guess I can't sign up. But that still is a possibility if you find yourself in the workforce, right?
For sure. And we have women that apply from all over the world because we do it virtually. So we've had women in Hong Kong, Japan, Australia, Canada be a part of our mentor program. So we really try to make it, because we're so blessed with technology, that it can be accessible to people wherever they are.
You know, she was talking about some of the benefits to her, but I have in front of me here something that was kind of an evaluation of what you do, in which they felt like you were able to elevate leadership and match calling and gifts to work, which would be kind of your professional area. Also build and strengthen relationships, which would be the relational area, as well as integrate faith in all aspects of life, which would be the spiritual area, and of course develop inner confidence and discover purpose. So you're working at a number of different levels simultaneously, aren't you?
Well, the mentor is really there to listen, to be objective, to provide options, and some of the mentees may have a specific area, but we try to make sure it's a whole life experience, so it brings in every part of that woman's life.
And again, like you said, it's worldwide, so you don't have to say, you know, we have listeners in Alaska and listeners in Florida and listeners in Vermont or New Hampshire or even in Maine, and saying, okay, I'm in the corner of the country here. I mean, you know, I'm not probably going to connect up with somebody like you in Dallas, but that's okay, right? As long as you have access to a telephone or access to a computer, you're in pretty good shape, aren't you?
You're in great shape. I mean, you had Heidi on. She had mentored a woman in Australia.
Yes. And she was on earlier. So, by the way, if you would like to know a little bit more, we also encourage you to use the search engine so you can find some of the previous interviews we've done with Diane, also with Heidi and some of the others. And so that is the case. But just before we go to the break, we're going to be pointing people to your website. So talk about what is there, because you have quite a bit in terms of the way in which they can, of course, support the organization, get involved, various events and those kinds of things. So talk about what is available when people land at 4wordwomen.org.
Great. Well, we really want you to connect with us in whatever way works best for you. But the way we provide really 3 key ways to connect. One is through our digital community. So we're publishing every week and we're on social media. Second, we have local groups in 24 cities. So that's probably the only thing that's really geographically constrained.
Right.
But we're in 24 major cities. And then last of all is our mentor program, which we've just been talking about, which is, again, not bounded by geography.
And I might just mention that I receive your emails. I'm not a woman, but I benefit from some of the material that you have there. So if some of you want to sign up for that, that would be the case. So we need to take a break, but you have a gala coming up as well. So we want to talk about that for just a minute and a couple of other issues. But as you just heard a minute ago, Julie called in, and if you'd like to be one of those people that participate or share a testimony, I'll be glad to take that for a few more minutes before we have to send Diane on her way. So that number is 1-800-351-1212. The website, you can simply find at our website, pointofview.net, or you can just go to the number 4, wordwomen.org, and sign up and get some of the information that is there. And, of course, we haven't talked about your devotional book, so I'll try to cover a few more in the next segment before you go on to your next activity. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Diane Paddison. And if you've just joined us, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the broadcast, because we've already given you a little bit of the history and talked a little bit about the mentoring program. But as you can tell, we still have a few more things to talk about, and we'll do so right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Visit pointofview.net and invest to help us enter 2019 strong. If you're not quite ready, please pray and get ready to make your next bold move. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, Diane Paddison in studio. And if you would like to watch, by the way, I might just mention that we're also on Facebook Live, so you can watch that, as well as, of course, our broadcast that is on our website, and, of course, on the radio stations that carry this program as well. So, again, if you would like to follow, you can do so. We also have a link to the website, forwordwomen.org. We just talked a little bit about some of the ways which you can get involved. And Diane, before we run out of time, let's talk about some of the ways in which people could teach this in their own community. I know we have pastors that listen to this program, Bible fellowship leaders, small group leaders. You actually have a curriculum. In addition to the books that we're going to be talking about, there's a way in which people can actually be teaching this in their small group or in their church, right?
Exactly. So we're blessed to have 2 women that were a part of Forward Write a book also, besides Work, Love, Pray. So we have Faith Powered Profession and Working Women of the Bible.
That's right.
And Work, Love, Pray, and they all have study guides. So you can actually use all 3 of those books. And we've actually done the Work, Love, Pray study guide at Willow Creek Church in Barrington 3 different times. We just finished our 3rd session. In addition to that, actually, our local group leader, Susan, writes a monthly curriculum where it really allows our leaders to basically print it off 5 minutes before their small group gets together. And it's a discussion around things like purpose or leadership. And there's content there, there's scripture, and there's application questions.
Well, again, I was just looking at our Facebook Live, some people saying thank you for doing this, Diane, and appreciate the vision that you've had in making this happen. Talk about these books in particular, because we've talked about your book in the past, Work, Love, Pray, which is partially a biography of you, but also a vision for that. And so that's one resource along with some of the other books. But now you have, I think, something that would be very helpful for a lot of our listeners if they're even thinking about wanting to give a present to someone, a birthday present, Christmas present, spring break present, whatever, that a year-long devotional for women in the workforce. And I even right now encourage some of you to say, well, this doesn't apply to me. You probably know somebody that I hope that you would maybe take the time to share this information with who would really benefit by you passing that on to them. But one of those things is this would be a great devotional to give to anybody that's in the workforce.
Exactly. You know, we were just blessed. The publisher came to us and said, we've never done one for women in the workplace, and you're the group to do it for us. And I said 2 things to the publisher. I said, 5 minutes max. These women are ultra busy.
Yes.
And I said, second, no dates.
Yeah.
They already feel guilty about work. They feel guilty about their time with their families. No dates. It's sold out of Amazon in 2 days.
Isn't that something? So, again, you can get that on your website. I think we have a link there as well. But this would just be a great thing to hand to individuals that need a little bit, if you will, a spiritual pick-me-up or a 10,000-mile wheel alignment or something like that, right?
Right. And what was really wonderful about this is we have 100 women that contributed. So from Mrs. Bush's senior advisor, Charity Wallace, talked about just a couple lines about what happened on 9/11 and what scripture got her through that. So just a lot of encouragement to a young woman who graduated from college and said, you know, I think I'm called to be a nanny. Yeah. And she added a day of devotion in.
Yeah. Again, it's called Be Refreshed. And again, we have information about that on the website as well. And just to keep this moving, let me talk about something else. I know you have a gala coming up, and this would be in the Dallas area, right? So this is more for our Dallas listeners, but let's talk about that, because sometimes when we talk with you, there are people all over the country in 43 different states, 275 different stations. They say, well, I can't ever meet you face-to-face, Diane, but this is one time for our Dallas listeners or people that would want to come here. They could actually have a chance to meet you and some of your staff, can't they?
You bet. So March 2nd, here in Dallas, and we have a lot of people that fly in. We have Joanna Gaines, lead designer.
Oh, boy.
Laura Tucker, and the co-founder of HGTV, Susan Packard. And it's going to be really fun because Laura is going to share how God just led her and opened doors that she ended up being Joanna and Chip, one of their first 3 designers, and just what the last 5 years have been about. And she's a millennial. Yeah. And then we have Susan, who created a company within a company and built HGTV, and of course Fixer Upper ended up to be their highest rated show. So Laura and Susan are going to have a really fun time sharing their journeys and also their challenges, and we're going to make it real. So
that just sounds really good, and we'll get you on before that again, because I certainly want to promote that when we get a little bit closer to the time. But also, you can mark your calendar right now, and if they go to the website right now, there are all sorts of resources there, because they can actually find out a little bit more about you. The newsletter sign up, you have a chance to join a local group and a number of other things. So how, again, can people connect? Because it's quite possible some of the people listening are saying, well, I'd love to meet somebody locally. Well, you may actually have a local group there, right?
Right. We may have a local group there, which you can go to the map and see. But if we don't in your city, if you can gather up about 5 women that are really passionate about starting a group, we'll start a group wherever you are.
I would think so. You also have a resource section. I thought we'd talk about that for just a minute. Spiritual, relational, health, financial resources, career resources. Some people might now say, I'm not quite ready to completely jump in and join with 4Word, but I certainly like to benefit from all the work that you obviously have done to help other women struggle with some of these issues and come to some biblical, practical answers. So what kind of resources are available?
Yeah, we have a lot of resources, as you mentioned, under the resource tab, but also you can actually get to all of our blogs. So, we've actually published over 1,000 blogs, and Jordan Johnston is just amazing running our digital platform, but she's interviewed women from all walks of life sharing their story. And so there may be somebody that you really would learn from or relate to. And so you can do that from anywhere in the world.
That is really amazing. And again, on the upper right-hand corner, it says search 4Word, because there are so many blogs that if you started reading now, it would take you the end of the year, right, to read them all probably, unless you're just a really fast reader. So the search engine is something I would really encourage you to take advantage of. But let's one more time, just recognizing people kind of tune in and tune out, let's talk one more time about this mentoring program, because if you have heard enough, of course, we just had a testimony from Julie in Colorado about how mentoring was helpful to her. What is necessary to actually join up with you, and what do I need to communicate to our listeners about this mentoring program?
Right. Well, what they need to do is actually go on our site and click on the mentor program tab and actually fill out an application. Our next class starts, the deadline to apply is January 11th. And they will have the opportunity to be mentored by a woman through a personal vision statement, setting goals around your spiritual, professional, and relational parts of your life, and actually setting action plans around all 3 of those. Plus, you'll be a part of the community of women, and we've had 430 pairs go through this program.
Yes. And let me, if I can, just step in and say that if you are older and have had some experience, get away from your humility for just a minute. You and I attended a Bible church, and I still was going to one of the events there. And I remember one time when we were at that Bible church, we were talking about, for the men, the need for providing more individuals to provide discipleship and mentoring. And the chairman of the elder board at that Bible church said, I don't really think I have anything to share with these guys. And I turned to him and I said with a smile on my face, if you don't have anything to share with them, we are in really bad shape. And the point was, he was just a very humble man who had been a corporate executive and everything, but sometimes he had to get over that, that humility of, I'm still learning myself, to recognize the things you've forgotten are the kinds of things that you would want to share with individuals. The things that you take for granted are certainly the things you want to share. So I'm hoping, if nothing else, we'll challenge some of the women out there to even join with you in one way or another, to reach out to these younger women that are just looking for any kind of help at all. And I think you would also agree that even though you're the mentor and you supposedly are helping these individuals that you're mentoring, you probably get the greatest benefit out of some of that, don't you?
We hear it all the time. We hear that. We hear what you just referred to a minute ago, which is so many of our mentors say, I didn't know I could provide value to Sally until I did this.
Yes. And so, again, I just want to challenge all of you to get involved in the program. And, again, if you want to know how to get involved, one last time, just before we take a break, 4wordwomen.org. And Diane, I've had a chance to see this organization just explode, which I had no doubt about given your ability. But if nothing else, I'm glad the Lord is blessing you, and thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Kerby, it's my honor to be here, and it is totally God that gets the glory. And I just have an amazing team, and we have 250 volunteers across the country. So I can't thank them enough for what they've done.
I need to let you get on to your next event. You are a busy executive, so I will let you do so. But again, you can find information at our website, pointofview.net. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about some issues in the news right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Jonas Yoder was a member of the Old Order Amish living in the state of Wisconsin. Yoder and others lived carefully according to their religious tradition in a community with other Amish and away from the influence of the modern world. After the 8th grade, Old Order Amish school children do not continue to high school where much is taught in variance with their Amish way of life. Instead, the children return to the home where they are instilled with the virtues of goodness, wisdom, and community welfare by their family. But these families ran into a problem as they sought to live out their religion that had motivated their families since the 16th century. The state of Wisconsin required students to attend school through at least the high school age of 16. Yoder's case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States that held that the state of Wisconsin could not compel these Amish families to send their children to high school. According to the court, only those interests of the highest order and those not otherwise served can overbalance legitimate claims to the free exercise of religion. Wisconsin v. Yoder was among the first cases that helped articulate an important balancing test that weighed a state's interest in governing against an individual's right to the free exercise of religion. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, let me just give you a preview of the next couple of hours. We are, first of all, going to be talking in just a few minutes at the top of the hour, Jerry Pattengale, and he is one of the individuals who is involved in this book that has come out called The State of the Evangelical Mind. And matter of fact, one of the contributors is Mark Knoll, who wrote The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind many years ago. And so this is kind of an update, and it really just talks about, again, the need for us to develop a Christian world and life view. The sad reality is oftentimes we're not doing that, and even in our higher education institutions, we're not doing that in a way that's effective. So we're going to be talking about that for a little while with him. Then we're going to have back in studio Grant Skeldon. He's, of course, been with us so many times when we've done our Millennial Roundtable, and he has this new book called The Passion Generation, which is, again, all about millennials, the seemingly reckless, definitively disruptive, but far from hopeless millennials. And Grant Skeldon is the author and co-authored it with Ryan Casey. Waller's been on the program with us as well. Some just incredible endorsements by Greg Rochelle, Tony Evans, and others. So just going to be a great couple of hours together. But let me, if I can, look at a couple of issues in the news. I have not talked about the terrorist attack in France, so I thought it would be worthwhile. And rather than try to go into all the details, I think our good friend Gary Bauer did a great job of summarizing that yesterday, in which he talked about this individual who attacked a Christian market in the French city of Strasbourg. He killed 3 people, wounded 13 more before fleeing the scene. At the time of the writing, Gary says a massive manhunt is underway, and of course, we'll see what happens there. But nevertheless, the point I wanted to focus on is not that individual, but the reality of what we're facing in France and perhaps in the United States if we don't take this issue seriously. Because Gary Bauer puts it this way: we've also learned that this individual had an extensive criminal history. He was another so-called known wolf on the terrorist watch list, which apparently means that authorities watch you to be a terrorist. And that's all they do. They know you're a terrorist. They just watch you, but we don't do anything. Now, on the one hand, I don't want to lose our civil liberties, but on the other hand, is getting nuts, especially the way it's done in France. So the question that, of course, Gary Bauer asked is, what's the purpose of this list? There are nearly 80,000 people on France's watch list. That means the government can't possibly watch all of them. And he says, it seems to me that the list is just another means of trying to placate the public, enabling politicians to say, oh, we have a list, while the bodies pile up. And he says, it's striking that the media collectively, and he says, even including Fox News, have come up with a way of reporting these attacks without in any way referring to them as being radical Islam, radical Muslim, Islamic extremist, or jihad, or anything that explains the motivation behind what just happened. Gary Bauer says various reports have stated that this individual has been radicalized in prison, has been monitored by French intelligence services because of his suspected religious extremism. But radicalized to what, Gary Bauer says? Veganism? Environmentalism? Isn't it important to know what he was radicalized about? He was identified with religious extremism. So the problem is what? Religion? He says, I know a lot of Christians who take their faith very seriously. They believe every word of the Bible as I do, but I'm not aware of anyone who violently attacked a mosque claiming Jesus required them to do so. And what is it that is regularly attacked in France and Germany this time of year? Christmas markets. So a French Islamic supremacist shot up a Christmas market because he wanted to kill Christians. This is the classic definition of a hate crime, Gary Bauer says, but you'll be hard-pressed to find this explanation of yesterday's events in virtually any mainstream media report. And the more of the Islamists kill us, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, Islamic Jihad, or the radical Islamic Republic of Iran, the more it becomes evident that a large segment of Islam is at war with the West. And yet our elites refuse to acknowledge this reality. He goes on to even point out the fact that it's not just France that's struggling with this Islamic extremism. The Department of Justice announced that the FBI had arrested one individual from Ohio who was planning an attack on a synagogue in Ohio for providing material support to the Islamic State. Interestingly enough, the undercover agents had been monitoring this man's social media account for several months, but they stepped up their surveillance when he expressed support for the October attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue. You might remember that one, which we've talked about before. Even told an undercover agent, I can see myself carrying out this type of operation inshallah, which means if Allah wills it. So last week, this individual told undercover agents that he had narrowed his targets down to 2 synagogues in the Toledo, Ohio area. He also said he wanted to kill a rabbi. Media reports said that this individual expressed hatred for Christians and wrote, I don't believe in the sugar-coated, watered-down Islam a lot of Muslims of the West follow. And as Gary Bauer reminds us, sadly, this individual is not alone. As we've reported, there are numerous mosques around America that are preaching anything but peace, love, and tolerance. So just a couple of things to remind us that though not all Muslims are terrorists, most terrorists are Muslims. And so radical Islam is still important, and we will certainly continue to talk about that. just before we take a break, my commentary just the other day was about some of the erroneous predictions about climate change, and I gave you two examples, one that appeared in Nature magazine, which is the prestigious British journal, which turned out to be erroneous, and then the other, which was a report from the National Climate Assessment Report that predicted the world would be 15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer by the end of this century. And again, pointed out that that was based upon all sorts of what I feel were erroneous assumptions. And some people said, well, shouldn't we pay attention to some of these predictions? And I thought I would, just as we come to the end of this hour, remind you of some of the predictions that didn't turn out quite so well. I'm going to do a commentary on that. Back in 1970, Harvard biologist George Wald, and I'm very remembering all of this because this was when you had the kind of Earth Week that took place, an Earth Day. But George Wald predicted that civilization will end within 15 or 30 years unless immediate action is taken against the problems facing mankind. Well, the world did not end in 1985. It also did not end in the year 2000, but that was his prediction. A few years later, you also have an individual by the name of John Holdren. By the way, if that sounds familiar, yes, he was the science czar under former President Barack Obama, but he and Paul Ehrlich wrote a book predicting that global warming would lead to the death of 1 billion people who would be starving to death by about next year. Didn't happen. Or you can go back to even more recently, 2006, when Al Gore warned in his documentary that sea levels would rise 20 feet in the near future. And so far, he's been off by about 20 feet. And even in the 2005 conference related to some of these climate change predictions, you had politicians saying that the world has less than 10 years before we'll reach the point of no return on global warming. Well, 2015 has come and went. It's now almost 2019, and some of those predictions haven't turned out. So it's just important to remember there have been some dire predictions made in the past. They just haven't worked out. Maybe someday they'll be right, but so far, every one of those predictions has been wrong. Let's take a break, though. We're going to spend some time talking about the state of the evangelical mind. It's really, if you will, sort of an update to that book. Came out years ago by Mark Knoll on the scandal of the American mind. So we're going to be talking about that and certainly welcoming your phone calls in that hour. And then in the third hour, Grant Skeldon will be in studio. We'll certainly be talking about the millennial generation, and I know you'll want to hear that as well. All that coming up, and if you go to the website, pointofview.net, you will be able to follow all of this right there on our website. We'll be back right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Visit pointofview.net and invest to help us enter 2019 strong. If you're not quite ready, please pray and get ready to make your next bold move. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me this hour. We're going to spend some time talking about the state of the evangelical mind. That is the title of this new book that has a collection of various essays. And really, in order to understand that, we're going to look back for just a little bit in our rear view mirror, because back in 1995, Mark Noll published the book, The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind. So we're going to look back to what was happening back then, how we have progressed or not in these last few years, and then really begin to look at what is happening in the church, in para-church organizations, in colleges, seminaries, and the rest. And I think it's going to be a fascinating discussion. But along the way, if you'd like to join the conversation, we certainly welcome your calls at 1-800-351-1212. If you are interested in the book, we, as always, have information about it on our website. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, published by University Press. But if not, you can certainly follow the link that we have at pointofview.net. One of the editors of this is Jerry Pattengale. Dr. Pattengale has his PhD from Miami University. He's a scholar, a researcher, and author and speaker, has served in the administrative leadership at Indiana Wesleyan University for all these many years, as also an individual that has served as the executive director of education for the Museum of the Bible, which we've talked about so often with various individuals like the Greens when they've been in studio with us, or like Jeremiah Johnston and others that have been involved with the museum. And I might also mention that you perhaps have seen some of the articles written by Jerry Pattengale that have appeared in things like, say, the Wall Street Journal, Christianity Today, or maybe in the Christian Post or the Washington Post, Religious News Service. And I might just mention he serves on the board of the Religious News Service, as well as Yale University's Jonathan Edwards Center, and joins us now by phone. Dr. Pattengale, I appreciate you joining us here on Point of View.
Well, it's great to be here, and congrats on the success of your program. You sure have built up quite a following, and I think it was Christianity Today that rated you number one in shows like this. So congratulations, and it's an honor to be on the show.
Well, it's an honor to have you as well. One of your contributors, of course, is Mark Noll, but before you even find his article, we find one that you and some of the others have co-authored. And take us back in history for just a little bit. Matter of fact, my producer, oftentimes when he was teaching school, would use that book, The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind. Those of us that are kind of in the academy world, we understand that book. But for some of our listeners, they might not even know that book exists or what it was actually articulating. So can you give us a brief overview?
Yes. Dr. Noll, as some of you may know, is one of the leading historians in the English language, really across different fields. And he starts the book out with a famous quote, or infamous, depending how you look at it. The scandal of the evangelical mind is there isn't an evangelical mind. And really what he was saying, whether you agree or not, this was his premise, is as he looked around, he simply wasn't finding Christians all those years ago that were publishing on the main stages. In fact, one of the things that's interesting about what he talks about, and he reflects on this in our book, is that he was at Wheaton at the time, and he looked around, and a lot of his colleagues were publishing great books, but they were all with Christian publishers, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, Bob Briner says in Roaring Lambs, he says there's a place for those that are ministering the church. We need that. But Mark said in the academy it's a little different because, 90% of the academy is not from a Christian-based presupposition or structure. And he said, so here I was at Wheaton, one of the flagship schools for all Christians, and we just were engaged in the major arguments. And he could not think of a single book that had been published by any of the faculty there on that stage. And so that's really what led him to write this and to challenge Christians to be more engaged on the public stage.
And that's one of the difficulties, because we recognize we can even use radio here, for example. A lot of people say, well, I only listen to National Public Radio. Okay, I understand that. And I listen to various programs that are, quote, secular programs, but I also listen to Christian programs. But if you're only talking to yourself, you're not going to have the kind of impact that you would want to have. And that's even more true, as you said, in the academy. And when I started seeing, well, just take an example, a few books that dealt with like intelligent design published by Cambridge University Press, or when I started seeing some history books, and we've talked with a number of our various individuals on this program that have published with Yale University Press on some of these historical issues, I was more encouraged because I recognized that it will have a greater visibility, maybe even stir the pot a little bit more than if it's published by Baker Bookhouse or InterVarsity or Zondervan, don't you think?
Yes and no. I agree with you basically, but what's happened in the last 10 years, and you published a slew of books. I don't know if you published 40 books or so, but you're very prolific. And your Yale training probably helped you with that. But what's happened in the last 10 years is some of the Christian publishers have found their way into major markets. I don't know if it's your last book that you did. You did a book.
Zondervan certainly has. I've seen some of those, and Harvest House, and go ahead.
Oh yeah. And so, like the last book I did before this one was with Worthy, and I think they had 50,000 pre-orders before the book ever hit. So there are places that are finding their way. But I think you raise a good point, is we have to make choices as publishers, as authors. Do we want to engage the larger market or the larger audience outside of the Christian circles or not? And they generally have a larger market. There are a few, like I have a contract with Tyndall House for a new book of Christian martyrs coming out next year, and Tyndall House certainly has a huge market as well. And Zondervan's now owned by HarperOne so
right.
And Worthy, I just mentioned, is now owned by Hachette, which is the third largest publisher. So what they're finding out is that when some of these publishers get their traction, the secular publishers want to buy them. And
I've noticed that over the years, yes.
Oh, yeah, and so point of view, you have to watch it. So, because there's interest in these subjects. And so what Mark Knoll was saying is that it's okay to do that. We need these great books, and he cites some of them in the chapter in our book. But he said we just need people that are on the same stage. Now, one of the things that both you and I have done is we have degrees from secular universities and private universities. Did you go to Dallas Theological as well?
No, they just let me teach there, but no, I don't have an actual DTS degree. Just get a chance to teach there.
Because I know you went to Yale, and then you had a second master's from somewhere else.
Georgetown.
From Georgetown. So you have, whether you call them parochial schools, secular private, or, they're changing, Georgetown especially, and my PhD is from Miami. But I also have solid private school degrees as well from Wheaton and Indiana Wesleyan. And there's an acceptance, whether you like it or not, that come from where your degrees and your books are from.
Very true. Let me take a break, and we need to come back. We got a lot to cover. It is the book, The State of the Evangelical Mind, Reflections on the Past and Prospects for the Future. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One song we often sing during the Christmas season is What Child Is This? William Chatterton Dix wrote the lyrics in 1865 when he was an insurance company manager and been struck by a severe illness. After a spiritual renewal in his life, he wrote a number of hymns, and this one was set to the tune of the traditional English folk song Greensleeves. What child is this who laid to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, while shepherds watch are keeping? This is Christ the King, whose shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him laud, the babe, the Son of Mary. This hymn then asks who this child is that was found by the shepherds not in a palace but in a manger. Why lies him in such a mean estate where ox and donkeys are feeding? And the next verse reminds us that Jesus is essentially born a peasant king. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh, come peasant king to own him. The King of kings salvation brings, let loving hearts enthrone him. Raise, raise a song on high, the virgin sings her lullaby. Joy, joy, for Christ is born, the babe, the Son of Mary. While shepherds must have wondered who was born in a manger, this verse reminds us that the wise men apparently believed him to be royalty and brought him gifts. Both shepherds and the wise men had access to baby Jesus because he wasn't born in a palace that would have guards and bureaucratic protocols. Isn't this a great picture for us today? All of us have access to Jesus and merely need to place our trust and faith in him. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue conversation today talking about this new book, The State of the Evangelical Mind, Reflections on the Past, Prospects for the Future, published by InterVarsity Press, about 170 pages, just great material, easy read, and Dr. Jerry Pattengale is with us. And Jerry, for just a minute, I will have to say that when I first saw the book and looked at the cover, I said, okay, this is probably going to be kind of a point-by-point update on the scandal of the evangelical mind, or maybe like a Festschrift where you bring some people together to address some of the work of Mark Knoll. So I open up the book, and I'm surprised, pleasantly surprised, I might say, because instead of just focusing all the time and attention on what's happening at Wheaton or something like that, you have chapters on churches, chapter on church, one on parachurch organizations, then of course one on colleges and universities, one on seminaries, and some others. So talk about the structure of the book. It was looking at this in a much broader way than just what's happening at a couple of the Christian colleges around the country, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, you're pretty perceptive. That's actually why the book signed. Actually, every publisher we talked to wanted the book. Major secular and private, and because we looked at it through institutional lenses, I define an institution as a systematic response to recurring need. And when you look across Christendom, we have these pockets of great men and women, leading these organizations, whether it's a parachurch or a college or one of the others that we have here outside the church. And so it works. I don't know what else to say there, because each one has its own particular, set of interests and needs. And so what we did is we went into those areas and tried to find a leader in that area that would probably have immediate respect by peers looking at the book, and I think that's probably what's helped it. It was the number one new release when it was first announced. So, and I'm sure that that's what did it. Not my name as an editor, and the other editors are great. Christopher Devers is at Johns Hopkins. Todd Ream just voted new publisher at Christian Scholars Review. He's at Taylor University. So. But it's the contributors for each of those areas I think really has drawn people to the book. So it'd be interesting to see which chapter gets the most attention.
Yes. Well, let me, if I can, at least do a brief overview. One of those, of course, I'd love to get your thoughts on the state of the evangelical church. Joanne Lyon wrote about that. I love that opening comment here. In recent years, when you talk about evangelicals, of course, it's been politicized, it's been redefined and everything. And I love the comment. I regularly hear statements like, well, I'm not that kind of evangelical. Part of the problem is even using the word evangelical. But especially when you're talking about the state of the evangelical church, that's important because when you say evangelical, you assume certain doctrinal assumptions, certain basic premises, certain things that are going to be the doctrinal statement of that church. But you can't necessarily assume that anymore, can you?
No, not at all. And, she wants to hold on to that name. I mean, not all the authors do. Jamie
I understand,
Smith,
yeah.
We'll get to that. But, her conclusion, if y'all may be reading just a couple of sentences here,
Sure.
says, as I reflect on the evangelical commitment to works of love, mercy, and justice, an imperfect tradition, but one nevertheless used powerfully by God, I am reminded that movements are carried by a strong narrative. But when the narrative is lost, it becomes very difficult to resist the seduction of political power that results in moving from prophetic to partisan to nationalism and civil religion. And then the last sentence of that, another loss of the narrative is one of seclusion, hopelessness. On the opposite side is that of attempting to find hope in secularism. And so what she's saying is that, we have people who've tried to do that, and we need to stay with the church. And we do have a long, rich narrative. And, she says, I think there is a cry for faith at the table, some type of hope and justice. Therefore, it's imperative that evangelicals regain their narrative of the biblical prophetic tradition from which the works of love, mercy, and justice are born. So it's her chapter, I think, is pretty weighty. She helped start the Limbs of Hope and World Hope organization. She's very often at the White House, and as a woman leader in that field, I think she has a lot of gravitas. But I think she's calling for us just to be more intentional about the narrative, the rich narrative that we have behind us.
And, one of the other things I would add is in the next hour when we talk about the millennial generation with Grant Skeldon and his new book, a lot of the younger generation are unaware of these movements. For example, she talks about the Wesleyan movement, and, of course, that's slavery, that's child labor laws. Later on, she quotes from an individual, of course, I've been with many times over the years when he was alive, Carl Henry, the uneasy conscience of modern fundamentalism. The whole younger generation thinks that when I'm involved in trying to fight maybe human trafficking, that's kind of a new idea, instead of understanding that they're part of a tradition that goes back centuries, really back millennia. True. And when we talk about really wanting to bring justice issues to the forefront and speak out against moral evil from the church.
Yeah, that's very perceptive, and I would encourage listeners to stay on for your next hour as well, because I go back to the great books tradition at Chicago, and it started, and Maynard Hutchins got hammered years later, but he said, the students will march in the streets to call for justice for and he used a different word, but for the downtrodden or to the marginalized, and he said, but I challenge them to define justice. And so what she's doing here is she's saying we have a tradition of pursuing justice both in action and in teachings at our universities and at our schools and our churches. And for her, that's, she's a strong evangelical and is proud of it. And she led the Wesleyan Church herself. She was the first single secretary of the church or president of the church and the first woman as well. So, so she seemed to be a fit for this from the holiness tradition and the strong narrative that we have. So the state of the evangelical of the mind in the church, it's calling for looking anew at the narrative. But one of the difficulties, it'll be interesting in your next hour, more and more of the large churches are not denominationally affiliated.
Right.
And so that brings a whole different dynamic, and I'll leave that for the next hour. But it's a lot of those people, those non-denominational churches, too, that, in the scale of the evangelical mind, a lot of them were very involved in that generation that went through that book, and now a lot of them have left churches, and I don't know the numbers, even though they're not really millennials, but they're dealing with that, and they're leading some of these churches. So it might be a good segue to go to that one on parachurches.
Yes.
It's at your alma mater, Yale. It's based out of the two fellows at Yale, Don Smedley and David Mahan. And what's really interesting in that chapter, when it talks about, really what it's implying is that if you think the age of strong evangelicalism is over, what do you do with the numbers David Mahan gives at the beginning of that when he shows that 300,000 people are accepting Christ? If that's a barometer for a Christian organization, through one parachurch organization alone, and so you're thinking, well, if the tide has changed and we're not calling for a strong evangelism anymore in some circles, then what do you do with those numbers? Something seems to still be working in just the old-fashioned sharing of the gospel. So he gives numbers there, but then Don Smedley, raised in that both of them are from a parachurch background, they say we didn't see a scandal of the evangelical mind. We didn't ever think that they weren't great scholars because all the people that were around us at our universities were publishing. So
yes.
It shows a whole different side of this, and it's the longest chapter in the book. But basically, Don was struggling, and we had a long conversation where he would call me, and I'd go out there, and we'd sit and talk, where he says, I don't really he's basically saying,
I don't agree.
I have a different view than what Mark Knoll presented in his book, but I truly love his book and think it's very important that people had read it.
I think so. And as you point out, it is the longest chapter because you have a part one and a part two for David Mahan and Donald Smedley. And again, when you look at, and I've spent a lot of years before I was doing the talk show going on college campuses, so whether it's Campus Crusade, now called Crew, Baptist Student Union, Navigators, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, the Wesleyan Foundation, and you just go down this long, long list of parachurch groups, and many of them are at sometimes even elite universities where you have individuals publishing, you see a different perspective. So let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. This is just a fascinating book called The State of the Evangelical Mind, and we're privileged to have with us a little bit longer Dr. Jerry Pattengale, and we are working our way through some of the chapters in the book. Again, I would encourage you to get the book so you could understand all of what we're talking about, but trying to give you a brief summary, and we'll continue that right after these important messages.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Visit pointofview.net and invest to help us enter 2019 strong. If you're not quite ready, please pray and get ready to make your next bold move. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have with us Dr. Jerry Pattengale. Might just mention we have a link to his website, or actually to InterVarsity Press has some information about him, but you can follow. And certainly that is a way that you can find out more about him and, of course, about the book. As I've said before, you probably could find it in your local bookstore, especially if it's a Logos-type bookstore or one that covers some that are a little more academic or tends to cover other InterVarsity Press books. But if not, we have a link so that you can get it either in hardcover or Kindle, The State of the Evangelical Mind, Reflections on the Past, Prospects for the Future, and it is just out, so I think you're going to really benefit from some of the material that is there. And Jerry, for just a minute, let's talk about that, how people can use this book, because obviously it's just interesting to read. But I'm thinking that if I'm involved in a small group, or just a minute ago, even as I was talking about a parachurch ministry, if you're part of a parachurch group, InterVarsity, Crew, Baptist Student Union, Wesley Foundation, Navigators, whatever it might be, even that whole conversation and discussion might benefit from this, and use it as part of a kind of a Bible study, reading along and thinking about what you would want to do on your college campus. I think if you are a parent thinking about sending young people off to a Christian school, you kind of want to read this, because we're going to get into that in just a minute, about what has been kind of the idea of a university, but also what Christian colleges have sometimes been. So I just think this is something that not only is just something that individuals could read personally, but you could also use it in some kind of small group discussion as well, don't you think?
Yeah. I think it would be good if someone would also help with each of the chapters to pull out ahead of time, what are some scriptures that actually speak to some of these more advanced thoughts, if you will, on these subjects. These are veterans that have waded these waters for a long time. And so if you were sitting down with that, for example, probably the easiest one to discuss here that is the most relevant, probably to people in the pew that may not know about the college situation. They may not know about the parachurch organization, but they do know what it the discussion about evangelicals and what's happened in the election. Evangelicals are blamed on a lot, or in a negative way or a positive way, depending on which side you're on. And so, and I think that's why Jamie Smith's chapter has gotten so much attention. So people start there. It's the most dangerous chapter of this book. And I just spoke on this book in Oxford, England, and it was the one we spent half our time on because it's so controversial. And so I think if someone would help a small group to say, what's the word evangelical mean, which in the preface we talk about that a little bit, and in the conclusion, but also then what does it mean today in this climate of associating it closely with politics? And I think the church might be surprised at some of the leading figures that don't like the term anymore when others hold strongly to it. If you talk to Harold Smith, who's over the Christianity Today, or Mark Galley, they would tell you definitely hold on to that term. It's a biblical term, So, if you just look at one section from Jamie Smith, Jamie Smith's chapter is about the contemplative posture and Christ-adapted eyes, teaching and thinking. Excuse me, I have the wrong chapter there. It's about the future is Catholic, the next scandal of the evangelical mind, and so he's provocative. He's saying, hey, we need to all become more universal in our thoughts and so forth, and all have we all have to have more of the basics together and not allow a lot of these things that are happening that are softer. And in one paragraph alone, he ruffles feathers across the church. He says nobody can be excited about the state of the evangelical mind when 81% of white evangelicals voted in the 2016 U.S. presidential election for Donald Trump, a lecherous, vicious, small-minded man-child who not only spurned evangelical instincts, and then he goes on, well, half the people in the room voted for Trump probably when he was saying that. So he's speaking from his position, which is the majority of people in at least elite academies or a lot of liberal arts places, and yet 80-some% voted for Trump. And so in a Bible study, back to your question, how do you unpack that? So then you're talking about what's it really mean to be an evangelical, and how do we have a positive face on that when you have people who are so critical of it because they can't divorce it from politics? And so I think that's one study is, okay, what does it mean for me to be an evangelical? And at some point, do I stand out because I still use the term, or do I shut it? And that's a question for everyone to handle. But at the end, Mark Galley comes around. He says, why would we give the term up? And so he's in disagreement with Jamie. So I would just tell you and the readers that this book has a lot of different views in it from solid Christians. Jamie is a solid Christian, teaches at Calvin, and yet I'm sure this chapter is going to be extremely controversial for a lot of people.
I would think so. Since we're talking about politics, in the introduction there, it talks about the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, oftentimes referred to as Obamacare. And, of course, that came in conflict with the whole issue of Hobby Lobby. You, of course, are familiar with some of that because as the Executive Director of Education for the Museum of the Bible, you recognize it's kind of the Green family at Hobby Lobby and also the Green family of the Museum of the Bible. There's another good illustration of the kind of the conflict between a religious institution and a government policy. So I saw that as another kind of, if you will, action point or conflict area that just surfaces just naturally from some of the things that are talked about in the book.
Yeah, that's a good example. I happen to be standing with David Green in his assistant's office when they filed their Supreme Court case, and I happened to be in Oxford with Stephen Jackie and a few others when they got the result from the Supreme Court case. Steve's president of Hobby Lobby. Right. So I'm pretty close to that. And if you talk to them, you're exactly right. There are two pillars that they give all their funds away on. They give half of their income away each year from their huge organization based on the two pillars of evangelical thought, really, and the value of a person's soul and the value of sharing God's word. And so they're pretty strong when you're talking about what it means to be an evangelical in the traditional sense, certainly in the Billy Graham notion and the founding of Christianity Today and other organizations. So that has put this all, so strongly in the middle of culture today, that one Supreme Court case probably more than any other. So that's a good example, and it has prompted a lot of interest in this book, probably more than any other thing. I mean, I would imagine. So, it has really, almost where you settle on that issue for a lot of people identifies you, whether you're intellectual or not, or whether you're smart or not. And so that's part of the reason a lot of people have been anxious about the term evangelical, because you're associated with people that they assume are just driven by passion and not education.
Let's, if we can, maybe just start the conversation a little bit about Christian colleges. Timothy Larson, of course, is at Wheaton, and you have a whole section here where it's entitled John Henry Newman's The Idea of a University and Christian Colleges in the 21st Century. A lot of people kind of wonder what's going to happen to some of these Christian colleges because ultimately people that send their kids there, or the kids that decide to go in there assuming they're going to get a Christian education, but not all of them are as maybe as biblically oriented as before, and yet others wanting to try to be accepted in the secular world or wondering, what they are to do. And so you've got all sorts of really important questions surfacing right now with the Christian college movement, don't you?
Yes, you're exactly right. And Tim is he is a lively writer. I don't know if you know Tim in person, but if not, hopefully you have him on your show sometime with all of his books. Mm-hmm. A great historian. But let me start this with Horowitz says in his chapter on debating moral education, that book. He says, just remember those of you in Christian education. He said, the primary reason that you exist is to learn more about God's nature is to learn more about how to be obedient to God. He says, so that's a primary reason to have a Christian university. Now, whether you agree with that or not, what he's doing is he's calling Christians back to saying, if you're going to be set apart from the other academies, don't lose your distinctiveness. And for evangelical schools that lose that distinctiveness, I think they're in the most jeopardy.
I agree.
And in his chapter here, that's why some of these new schools like King's College and others, that's why they have a following right out of the chute, because people keep looking for more and more conservative schools. Even Patrick Henry College and others, they're looking, whether it's a politically conservative. And if they lose that distinctiveness, they lose a chance to even have a school.
Well said. Let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll talk about seminaries and a few other issues on the table right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Jonas Yoder was a member of the Old Order Amish living in the state of Wisconsin. Yoder and others lived carefully according to their religious tradition in a community with other Amish and away from the influence of the modern world. After the 8th grade, Old Order Amish school children do not continue to high school where much is taught in variance with their Amish way of life. Instead, the children return to the home where they are instilled with the virtues of goodness, wisdom, and community welfare by their family. But these families ran into a problem as they sought to live out their religion that had motivated their families since the 16th century. The state of Wisconsin required students to attend school through at least the high school age of 16. Yoder's case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States that held that the state of Wisconsin could not compel these Amish families to send their children to high school. According to the court, only those interests of the highest order and those not otherwise served can overbalance legitimate claims to the free exercise of religion. Wisconsin v. Yoder was among the first cases that helped articulate an important balancing test that weighed a state's interest in governing against an individual's right to the free exercise of religion. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we continue our conversation with Dr. Jerry Pattengale, and again, one of the editors of the book, The State of the Evangelical Mind. I wanted to move in just a minute to seminaries, but while we were talking about colleges, one of the things you mentioned in passing is really important to strike again and mention, and that is if you lose your denominational evangelical distinctive of a Christian college, I think they're going to be, especially with the high cost of Christian education anyway today, more and more parents and even students say, I'm not going to bother. I mean, if I'm going to not get anything distinctively Christian out of this university than I would if I went to the state college, I can save myself thousands and tens of thousands of dollars and go somewhere else. So it does seem to me that losing your distinctive also means losing the possibility of existing by the middle part of the century, don't you think?
Oh, exactly. In fact, what's happened is a lot of schools, if you look on their Christian websites, it'll say, their websites of universities, it'll say has a historic association with Christianity. Usually that means they're no longer Christian at their core. Tim does say that, statements of faith, like at Wheaton, and I have a degree from Wheaton as well, and he says, where he teaches, he said, it doesn't mean that our statement of faith doesn't change over the years. It just means that whatever our changes are, we have full disclosure regarding where it currently stands as a community. And basically what he's saying is that you may have cultural things that come, and there's no longer issues in some areas, and there's new issues in others. And so he was trying to be clear that it doesn't mean that you don't constantly think through where you're at, always with the Nicene Creed not changing, or the your main tenets of the faith. But he said it's a constant process, of looking at what you believe and then being transparent about what you believe.
Well, and again, let's say we can move to seminaries for just a minute. Lauren Winter writes about that. And again, that's another issue, because just as we've said this about the colleges, it's really true about the seminaries, because you're going to have more and more men and now women wanting to get some kind of training, wanted to prepare for what could be kind of the typical ministry. But of course, Lauren, looking at this from the experience at Duke University Divinity School, is going to be looking at maybe in a broader perspective. But again, cultural, spiritual distinctives are going to be really important in the 21st century, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, and you have a great example with your alma mater at Yale. And I was reading a book my friend Charlie Phillips just wrote, one of the last of the true followers of Edwards in his teaching. He got the #1 prize in the entire United States for teaching theology, and it was given out where he taught Andover Seminary. Well, it was the oldest seminary in the country, so he gets the top prize for teaching the Bible, really, and that seminary now is closed. And a lot of the reasons it's closed is for the reasons we're talking about. And so it is a shot across the bow, if you will, to seminaries. The exciting thing for the church globally, though, is that the seminaries in other countries are growing exponentially compared to what's happening in the United States. We're losing seminaries every year, and it's an extremely difficult financial model to keep a seminary going. So unless you have a creative distribution, it's tough. And I think Lauren does a really good job of reminding people that seminaries, it's to train pastors, and pastors, she says, have all sorts of roles and responsibilities in the lives of people. The pastor's job is to try, and possibly, in parentheses, to become an expert in all fields, or is not to try to be an expert in all fields, but to have an obligation to the intellectual lives of their people. And so, trying to help the pastors to understand more fully and be more aware of things around them. And we do have examples of some seminaries that have grown, in the many thousands, like what Liberty's doing, and now Grand Canyon. And so there can be. Indiana Wesleyan started a seminary that filled up immediately, and it's a hybrid model. So part of the call here is to stay true to training the pastors, but the other is also to try to understand the context. You're teaching at a very solid institution, and I might ask you what's been the secret to its success over the years as well as you look at this. I mean, it's truly has one of the best reputations, I believe.
Yeah, and again, whether you look at some of them that have been around for a while, like think of Moody Bible Institute, been around since the 19th century, or some of these others, I think true to their calling. But I thought just before we go, there are some things that were in the forward I never mentioned, but one of those is how some perceives seminary as optional, and one of the quotes in there is a pastor of a large megachurch one time proclaimed, "If I wanted to learn more about how to be a successful minister, I would go to Harvard Business School long before I would go to Fuller Seminary." Now, nothing wrong with Harvard Business School, because my woman with me the first hour here is a graduate of Harvard Business School. But again, I think that just almost illustrates again, maybe not the anti-intellectualism, but just the idea that, we almost perceive that seminary has become optional, and that's another, if you will, scandal of the evangelical mind, isn't it?
Yeah, that's well stated. Lauren is so lively and provocative as well in talking about seminaries, and there are a number of reasons to go to seminary, and I think one of the things I hope this book does overall, not just for seminaries, is to challenge people in whatever institutional organizational setting they're in, is whether or not they are going to identify with the heart and soul of biblical teaching in the task they have before them, and where does that put them, in evaluating their own vocation. Is it, first of all, your association politically, or is it, first of all, association with your calling in your ministry and trying to bring those two together? And so I hope it helps in each one of these areas. I mean, we didn't cover all of the, of the enclaves in society, but we tried to cover enough that prompted people to pick up the book and to look in their own areas and then read across areas. Mark Galli's conclusion. Mark Galli's the editor at Christianity
Today. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they're teaching beautiful orthodoxy there, and so. What he's seeing here, and when he looks at these chapters, he would disagree with probably about half of these chapters. But he sees evangelicalism as, still has some vital things to bring to the larger Christian conversation. And, he said to do that, we just can't, and his quote, we can't abandon evangelical distinctives. And he talks a little bit about some of his own journey in there. And so if you're looking for a personal side to this more academic discussion, if you will, Mark, I think, gives that. Obviously, he's a good thinker, but he brings that, to the book.
Well, again, just some great material in there. Of course, we mentioned some of the stuff by James K. Smith as well. So we've done a pretty good job of giving a brief overview of the book, but I would encourage people to go and buy a copy of it. It is available certainly online, and I suspect you might be able to find it in your local bookstore, published by InterVarsity Press. And Jerry, I appreciate you giving us an hour today. I know you're a busy individual, and so thank you for joining us here on Point of View.
Well, thank you. Appreciate all you do, and I do trust this book is helpful to people in a lot of different areas. So thanks. It's been an honor to be on your show.
In the next hour, we have Grant Skeldon in studio. The Passion Generation, published by Zondervan, the seemingly reckless, definitively disruptive, but far from hopeless millennials. We've been looking forward to that conversation. He joined us on the round table for Millennial Conversation. He'll be in studio with us right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you listen to this program any length of time, you know my next guest, because he has been part of our Millennial Roundtable for so long. But we've also been very excited about the release of his new book, The Passion Generation, the seemingly reckless, definitively disruptive, but far from hopeless millennials. Grant Skeldon is the author, also with Ryan Casey Waller's been on the program with us as well. Mm-hmm. And first of all, just great to see your book in print, isn't it?
It is. It's awesome that it's come to fruition.
And one of the things we might spend some time talking about before we get too far into it, those of you watching online will notice as I hold it up there, there's just all sorts of great illustrations and diagrams and things of that nature, which I thought added so much to the book. And so in addition to just having 280 plus pages of great content, a fairly significant amount of the book are illustrations. And I think for just a minute, talk about how those came to be.
Yeah, I basically, I was speaking one day, and all of a sudden there was this guy on a whiteboard next to me, kind of as I was speaking at this conference, and he was drawing out kind of little quotes and pictures and almost like a roadmap of what I was saying. And I just think that was so unique that he was able to kind of come up with images for a message. And at the very end, it just has this whole like story. But as a person that puts a lot of work into speaking, it's cool to see like, yeah, that was my message illustrated. And I posted on my Instagram and people just loved it. And so I thought, well, how much better if I could actually tell them months ahead of time, can you draw out these quotes that seem to connect really well with parents, pastors, and business leaders?
And again, I'll just hold it up just to give you some other examples of some of the great material that is there. I might also mention that 17 chapters, and you've broken them down in discipling millennials, what millennials look for a church. But if you flip over, you have topical content. In other words, chapters you could look at that would be helpful for parents, chapters that would be helpful for pastors, chapters that would be helpful for business leaders, because I know that's certainly something you've been working with as well, and chapters helpful for millennials. And if that's not enough, again, I just love this. I mean, you are so creative. This is just a work of art, I think. You have what is a device icon. So occasionally you'll come to a section and then you say, I'd like to see a video on that. And the bottom line is you pull up Passion Gen online on your phone or laptop, and then you match the video number to the book page, and you have a chance to do that. So this reminds me of some of the things I've seen where people will do these quotes or these various icons and then encourage you to get some others. So there is a way in which people can not only read the book and see all the great diagrams, but also watch you in action when you're talking about some of these videos.
Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to help people that are audio readers, video. I feel like video is pretty untapped when it comes to reading. And so, yeah, there's sections where you can go watch a video that accompanies the book. And also, you talked about the 280 pages. I will say about 40 pages are pictures.
They are pictures.
Now, they are pictures with content, so it's kind of like, I call them quotable pictures.
Yeah.
But they help you visually remember things that happen in the book. There's recaps for every chapter.
Yeah, so, well, again, as I hold these up, you can just see some of the pictures that just give you a sense, but you're right, that is certainly the case. And let me just break the code here. A lot of people see this as a book on millennials. It's really a book on discipleship, isn't it? I mean, you have all sorts of great insight about what discipleship is and is not. Mentoring, just a few hours ago, we were talking about mentoring. And so mentoring sometimes is come and meet with me. Discipleship is come and follow with me. most church events, come and listen to me. I think I've heard Grant Skeldon say that a few times.
Absolutely. And as I've gotten to speak over the last 5 years, I was actually just doing the metrics at the end of the year, and I realized, man, I went from speaking the first year to about 2,000 people on millennials to about 5,000. And now 4 years later, it's about 120,000 leaders, usually pastors that are trying to reach millennials, parents that are trying to raise millennials. And lately, like you said, even business leaders that are trying to retain millennials. But the main message I say is it's not skinny jeans. It's not getting cooler worship. It's not flexible work hours alone. Like the main thing I think is the source of the millennial problem is a discipleship problem. And so the first half of the book is, what does practical discipleship look like in the 21st century, especially in America when everyone is so busy?
Yes, I certainly want to cover that issue of discipleship. But early on in the book, you do ask this question: what do millennials want? And you have had pastors ask you that question. You've had business leaders ask you that question. Sometimes even millennials themselves say, I'm not even sure what I want. So can you give us a short answer here? Because it's something you address early on in the book.
Yeah, I say in the book that I think many millennials are looking for a cause to fight for,
right,
and a community to belong to. And so I would even also add maybe someone to guide them to get there. There's a book called A Hero with 1,000 Faces, which I talk about in the book, which highly influenced especially Star Wars. There's really no Star Wars movie where there's not, basically the premise is there's a whole bunch of movies and stories written on how a young person has a dream, and they're kind of have this tension where they can't fulfill their dream. And then it's kind of like the Karate Kid.
Yeah.
Then this like older sensei or sage comes in and helps them. Every single Star Wars movie has that. Young person, they're trying to figure out. Solo movie just came out, trying to figure out. And then you get this type of guide. Moana has a guide. Disney movies do it all the time where there's a guide. And so I would say, yeah, a cause to fight for, a community to belong to, and then someone to guide them there. And then as you were probably about to show, there's not only one type of millennial, there's several. And so you can kind of talk about what are the other millennials to be described.
Well, again, I just thought it was, there's just so many really great insights in this book. You know, I'm going to see what we can do to put them on our Instagrams and things like that. But one of those is you have, just a diagram here, the hip millennial and the gadget guru, the millennial mom, the clean and green millennial, the anti-millennial, the old school millennial. Just, you have diversity, and as a generation that has such a large sweep, if you go from 1980 to 2000, now some people go into 1980 to 1995 or something like that, but still, this is enormous number of individuals. It's almost unfair to even suggest that all millennials are basically the same.
Yeah,
right?
I've always kind of made that joke that I'm being asked, what do millennials want? And I think, I am Mexican, South African, and I'm single, and I'm 28 right now. There's such a swath of different types of millennials in different life stages, one of the most diverse generations ever. And so I really wanted to show there are different types of millennials. Not all millennials can, at the same time, wear skinny jeans, want to find Coney. I don't know. Like, there's all these, be gluten-free. Like, I'm not. And so I think sometimes we put all these things together and make some Frankenstein millennial that really doesn't exist.
Well, again, this is the book that has just come out, and again, it is kind of the definitive book I think that we're going to be referring to time and time again on millennials. And see if we can get you back for some of the millennial roundtables. I know you're so busy; it's kind of hard to do so. So Nick Pitts and I have had to do kind of it without you, but your insight has been just really helpful. So let's take a break. When we come back, though, what I want to try to do is a couple of things. First of all, I want to spend some time really talking about discipleship. I might also encourage you to go to the website, because as you go there, you're going to find some information about the Initiative Network. And I certainly want to connect you up with that organization and the tremendous impact that is having as well. And, of course, this book is one I am sure you'll be able to find in your local bookstore. But just in case you say, well, I just don't want to wait till they get a shipment in, we've made it possible for you to get it in paperback or in Kindle. And, of course, you can find out more by going to the Initiative Network, which is initiativenetwork.org. That's on our website as well, and you can go to the store and find it there. Of course, we have a link there as well, and it is the new book out on the millennial generation. But you'll be surprised over the next couple of minutes. We're going to talk a lot more about what discipleship is and not what sometimes people think discipleship is, even before we get back to the conversation about millennials. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one song we often sing during the Christmas season is What Child Is This? William Chatterton Dix wrote the lyrics in 1865 when he was an insurance company manager and had been struck by a severe illness. After a spiritual renewal in his life, he wrote a number of hymns, and this one was set to the tune of the traditional English folk song Greensleeves. What child is this who laid to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, while shepherds watch are keeping? This is Christ the King, whose shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him laud, the babe, the son of Mary. This hymn then asks who this child is that was found by the shepherds not in a palace but in a manger. Why lies him in such a mean estate where ox and donkeys are feeding? And the next verse reminds us that Jesus is essentially born a peasant king. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh, come peasant king to own him. The King of Kings salvation brings, let loving hearts enthrone him. Raise, raise a song on high, the Virgin sings her lullaby. Joy, joy, for Christ is born, the babe, the son of Mary. While shepherds must have wondered who was born in a manger, this verse reminds us that the wise men apparently believed him to be royalty and brought him gifts. Both shepherds and the wise men had access to baby Jesus because he wasn't born in a palace that would have guards and bureaucratic protocols. Isn't this a great picture for us today? All of us have access to Jesus and merely need to place our trust and faith in him. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, one of the premises of your book, I would have to say, Grant Skeldon, is the fact that we maybe haven't been doing discipleship well. And so as a result, that's one of the reasons why we're facing kind of the millennial crisis. And you have said on your program, on this program many times before, but it's also in your book, discipleship isn't adding something to your calendar. It's including someone in your calendar. And you even have a diagram that I was trying to find real quickly. Oh, there it is, where you just really have an understanding that the church doesn't have a millennial problem. It has a discipleship problem. And it does seem to me that that really is the core. If we're going to disciple the Generation Y millennial generation, or now we're talking about Generation Z, the iGen generation, we've got to get back to biblical principles of discipleship. And you find yourself more and more talking about that, don't you?
Yeah, I'm always saying, hey, we got this millennial problem because we actually have a discipleship problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the jokes I've been making, but I am serious, is that if you want to reach this generation that's so cause-oriented, simply make the commission great again.
Yes.
There's this great commission, this incredible cause, a cause that's far more powerful and eternal than any nonprofit or any other institution. The church is the one institution Jesus chose to make. And I'm a nonprofit leader that realizes this is the greatest cause if you're going to die for something. But I think, why is this cause generation not connecting with this cause? And I think it's because, unfortunately, we as a church, Christians, have neglected this cause. Therefore, it doesn't seem like we're doing much other than saying, hey, come next week and show up to this new series, then come the week after that to this new series, and then come the week after that to this new series. And that call to action is actually, it's good, but it's not compelling to a generation that wants to go and change the world. The beautiful thing is that's what God's called us to do, is to go and make disciples of all nations. And so I think if we could make the commission great again, we'll actually see the next generation come back. And so I always say it's not a book on how to reach millennials. It's more of a book on how to be the church God has already called us to be.
Well
Millennials
said.
would be really excited to be a part of that church.
Talking about causes for a minute, let's get outside the church and say your generation, even the previous generation, said, we want to get involved in building houses, Habitat for Humanity.
Mm-hmm.
We want to stand up for justice issues. We want to fight human trafficking. You can think of all sorts of causes out there that have attracted your generation and others that certainly have been worthwhile causes. But when you get back into the church, what better cause than fulfilling the Great Commission?
Yeah, and let me see. I am not, there's this idea, sometimes I think people think, well, millennials just want social justice. I do think that young people want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, and I think it's the lack of churches being external and them really being, I think, self-seeking or internal. And I never want to say with bad intentions. It's seeking the health of the church. In the book, I say most pastors are considering the health of their congregation more than the health of their city. If I wake up every morning and instead of asking how is the church, if I was a pastor, and instead I asked how is the city, well, the church just like Jesus. If Jesus always asked how are my disciples, the dudes were bad the whole time. Like even at the end, they're cutting people's ears off. In the last days, they're falling asleep when he's praying. Like if he had to wait until they were healthy, he never would have gone on mission. And so I think we're asking this question, and instead we should
Good
ask,
line.
how is my city? Then instead of seeing the church as something I need to help, I would see the church as an instrument to reach the city. And what I found in mission and on mission, it starts to sanctify us because we have to become something we're not, which causes us to rely on the Lord. And all of a sudden, we start to become something new. And that's what happened to the disciples. And so I think the more we become more external focused on the city as our scorecard, not on attendance at church, then we will see a major shift in the next generation want to join the church.
And you have been participating in some of these citywide activities. I mean, there's some in New York, there's some in Dallas, other places like that really have, and nothing else, I think, broadened the vision of your typical pastor, maybe broadened the vision of the typical Christian who only sees the church as important within the walls or maybe extends it a little bit to their business field, but doesn't really tend to have this great commission vision, right?
Yeah. I was part of a high school ministry when I was 16, just got saved. And I, at a very young age, had pastors kind of say, I think you're called to ministry. I was really good at getting other young people to go to church.
Right.
And when I became a Christian, they said, that's what you need to do. Invite all your friends to church. And so I had like 40 young people coming with me sometimes. One of the pastors called me an evangelical beast.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I love that, but now looking back, I wasn't an evangelical beast because I actually wasn't sharing the gospel with them. I was just inviting them so my pastor could share the gospel with them. And so now I realize that that's not evangelism. It is inclusion, it's intentionality, it's all good. But I wish what they would have said is, you are the light of the world, and I need you to go to them. There's this saying in church, come as you are. But the reality is that's with an assumption that they're coming. And this generation is not coming to church. And so I would say we need to shift from come as you are to go where they are. And again, that goes to an external focus. My saying I would also say is the mission, God's church doesn't really have a mission. God's mission has a church. Mm-hmm. So it goes back to that. The church the people is an instrument to the city or to your context or your background or wherever you may work. And so again, I just think this isn't even something just millennials are excited about. I found so many older people say, hey, I'm not a millennial, but I want church to be like this too. And so I think it's something that everyone is kind of excited for and wish church would become more. Even pastors are like, man, I went to seminary to see this kind of church. But when you get into church, something happens where you got to think about the budget. You got to think about attendance. And you get
internally focused.
So it's not bad intentions. There's something about what we've made church or allowed church to be that is kind of drawn us away from the main ministry, which I would say is making disciples who change the city.
Again, another theme you just touched on, but let's expand it a little bit. Empowering the people, not one pastor. This idea that even you talk about that church doesn't need more members, it needs more devoted members and owners, if you will. So part of it is to get the ministry in the hands of the laity. Now, I thought the Protestant Reformation was supposed to have done that, and maybe it did partially, but we certainly have a desire and a need to do that here in the 21st century.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So the Protestant Reformation, yes, put the power, I guess, in the hands of the laity. but I would say more put the knowledge in the minds of the laity. So now we had access to the Word of God. And I actually used the illustration of the Reformation, is I think it's about 500 years since the last Reformation. Last year it was. I think the next Reformation will move away from just giving people the Word of God to also calling them to the work of God. And when we ask, what is the work of God? When Jesus pulled up his sleeves, joined us, Emmanuel, God with us, the thing he chose to put predominant amount of time into was discipleship. And so it's not just about what you know, but the Great Commission says to teach them to observe and obey, not just to know. And so I think, yes, we gave everyone knowledge of the Word of God in different translations and caused different denominations, but now we need to call it the everyday person, not just pastors, to go and make disciples.
One of the things you have in there is where you say, can we all at least agree that 100% of us know more than we're obeying, right? Yeah. And so you put yourself in there, and then you have a little diagram where we can put ourselves next to that. So we recognize that sometimes we say, well, I don't know enough. No, you probably know more. If you were just obedient to what you know, the church would be on fire, right? And you even say pastors and leaders don't try to put out a fire, they try to throw gasoline on the fire. So it does seem to me that those are some of the theories that you've been talking about here as well, right?
Yeah, the knowing thing, I mean, I read the Bible slowly because I'm like, why am I trying to learn more when I'm yet to obey what I already know? And so, I think that there's not an issue of, one of the number one questions I get asked when I talk about discipleship with pastors is they're going to ask, hey, what book or what curriculum would you recommend? We love this. We want to do discipleship. What curriculum should we go through? And I'm like, discipleship isn't curriculum. It's not. It's a vehicle which utilizes curriculum. And the only curriculum at this point I would recommend is the Bible. I mean, we've got to stop looking at other curriculums. And I'm a guy, I said, hey, right after this, I was like, and this is ironic because I'm writing a book and telling you, don't use this book as your curriculum for discipleship. It can be an addition. But if we already have such a biblically illiterate generation, just stop giving them studies on people's studies of the Bible.
I love that other line you have.
Go to the Bible.
Yeah. And you got a great little diagram. You know, we're studying the studies of other people studying God's Word. We need to be studying God's Word.
Yeah.
So let's take a break here. And by the way, if you'd like to join us, I suspect you just want to sit back and learn some of the wisdom that comes from Grant Skeldon. But again, the book is entitled The Passion Generation. We come back, we're going to talk a little bit about maybe it would be wise for us to participate in mission and outreach with people that aren't like us, you know, and how many of you, as you look around in your small group or your Bible study or your church, everybody looks just like you. And so what does that look like? And also talk about some of the arenas of discipleship, personal life, family life, church life, work life. We'll get into this whole idea of discipleship reformation and maybe even some of the positions of the dream team, which I thought was really well done, and just a couple other great ideas. And if you find yourself saying, well, this is a really incredible book, it is, because it not only gives you all of these chapters, but then breaks them down into those which would be helpful for parents, pastors, business leaders, or millennials, and then has a video component as well. So it's just a phenomenal book, published by Zondervan, and written by Grant Skeldon, who's right across the table from us. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Visit pointofview.net and invest to help us enter 2019 strong. If you're not quite ready, please pray and get ready to make your next bold move. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, we are privileged to have in studio with us a little bit longer Grant Skeldon. The book is entitled The Passion Generation, the seemingly reckless, definitively disruptive, and far from hopeless millennials, and it is published by Zondervan. And as we pointed out, even when I give you the page number, which I will one more time, recognize that a lot of those are those diagrams, about 280 pages. But one of the diagrams is here, which we just mentioned a minute ago, ready for Reformation. You know, the first Reformation was mass print. Now you talk about this next Reformation, mass media. The first Reformation, clergy controlled, now pastor dependent. The power to the people was the word, now discipleship. And something I wanted to get to, theology divides, mission unites. Even though I have done some interviews, even last hour, with some people that are differing in terms of their theological perspective, even in the book that was put together, even if I find myself having some theological disagreement with this person or that person, if we're on mission, we're all moving in the same direction. And that's certainly something that is a theme that runs through your book as well.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I was recently in a room with the district attorney for Dallas. It was after a police shooting, and it drew about 12 pastors together. I remember it was T.D. Jakes, it was Todd Wagner, it was Jeff Warren and Brian Carter. I was very privileged to be in the room because I'm so young. Two, I'm not a pastor, and so just to be able to represent a younger voice. But I remember for the racial differences in the room, one of the pastors said, one thing is, even if we were to get racially reconciled, we got all the hurdles of the theological differences, even in this room. And it was a kind of an aha moment. And there's so many ways that can divide us. But the one thing that really united us is that the mission of God and caring about those who are hurting and those that are in need. I think Hurricane Harvey is my favorite area where we just saw a massive display of Christians from across the nation respond to this need. And when we're serving and we're over there pulling people out of like really difficult situations, no one cares like, hey, wait, what's your theology before you do this? No one cares. Like, I'm not saying that theology doesn't matter. It absolutely does matter. But it draws us as Christians together, and it also just looks really like Jesus to those outside of the church.
One of the things I might also mention, too, that I appreciate about you and Nick Pitts and others is the fact that you are fairly well-read. And I remember you said years ago when you were on the program with us for the first time, and it shows up again in your book, that Charles Haddon Spurgeon, I started reading Spurgeon ago, and I'm thinking, that would be another thing to really pass on to the younger generation. There are some godly men and women that have preceded us that can give us some ideas and some perspectives and some biblical understanding. And so just this idea that the only thing I'm going to read is what's on my iPhone, probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I got messed up in all the right ways when I went to a college at a seminary, and I had to start reading. I remember it was Augustine, City of God, and I had never read a book other than, I read a Max Lucado book, and then I went straight to City of God, and it was a wake-up call. And most of my friends had already read, my new friends in seminary had already read Confessions, and they had read all of these books. They knew a little bit of Greek because they're private school. I was at such a disadvantage, but it was so good because I always felt like I'm the dumbest of this really, really smart group, which made me kind of still smart, but it made me so hungry. And so with that, though, I fell in love with, I was like, man, I had no idea that the church I went to was extremely young and edgy. And it made me fall in love with older, I say in the book, older dead dudes that wrote these books, because I still believe this. I think a lot of books that are modern Christian books have a lot of fluff, and it's about a lot of church strategy growth and small groups and all this stuff, which is good stuff. It doesn't have the type of angst when I read C.T. Studd or William Wilberforce or Charles Haddon Spurgeon. That stuff, they don't seem to be talking about how to grow a church. They seem to be talking about how to live a life of angst and obedience, which ultimately leads to a large church.
I might just mention, too, when you give the acknowledgments, again, we have diagrams. We have some of the pictures of these individuals. And, of course, Raymond Harris has been on the program with us. And, of course, we mentioned Charles Spurgeon and Gary Brandenburg. I mean, a lot of these people I know. Some of them haven't been around for 100, 200 years, and others are down the road, Adam Wright and others. But it just illustrates, again, some of the great material in the book. Let me open up the phones in case you would like to ask a question. First of all, we have a link to the initiativenetwork.org, and I would certainly encourage you to go there and find out more about how to get involved and to find out about some of the events. If you would like to schedule Grant Skeldon to come and speak to your group, I know he's cutting back some, but I know you would certainly welcome all of that. That's all available at the initiativenetwork.org. And, of course, you can give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We talked about the differences theologically, but you also talked about some of the other issues, and that is you ask us a very powerful question. Are you going to a church, small group, whatever, where everybody looks like you? And that I thought was very good. Are you a regular in any groups that don't look like you? And then the bottom line is Jesus was going to those groups. And there is a sense in which I understand the homogeneity that sometimes is important for a church. Got that. But if that becomes your silo, it keeps you from reaching out to the most diverse generation in American history, which is the millennial generation.
Yes, and it goes so many ways. If I was speaking to older generations, I would say, hey, if you want to disciple young people, you got to be around young people. You got to start tithing your time to be around younger generations. Because, Jesus was called a friend of sinners because he was commonly around sinners or people that were clearly different than the group, giving him the not positive nickname. But also, if I'm in a young group, I always get onto them, and I would even get onto young people more. That I'm like, young people, if you are not often the youngest person in the room, you are in the wrong rooms. Like, you are wasting your most precious time of your life. Because I believe if you are a young single, this is the one time in your life before you get married, you have this stage where you're like, you don't have to ask your parents for permission to go do something, and you don't have to ask your wife or your husband to do something. You can just go. Like, you can just go and do whatever you want. And we tend to spend that precious time that we'll never have again, worrying about who we're going to get married to, trying to figure out what is God going to call me to do, and I need a whole plan in order to get there. And I just say, go all in wherever God has you, but especially do not surround yourself with just young people. That is so unwise because it's like Lord of the Flies. It's all these young people trying to make the rules and figure out life. I liken it to sixth graders asking other sixth graders for dating advice. You need to get some healthy married people to give you some advice on relationships. And so I get so on to young people because I have this heart for y'all. You guys are trying to figure out what God's called you to do in your life. You're trying to figure out what to go do, and you are so passionate, but you're wasting all your time comparing yourself to where your friends are.
Yes.
Spending all your time with your friends. It's leading to what I call in the book obsessive comparison disorder, or OCD, for millennials.
That's all you talk about.
And so I just say, go be around older people. In the book, my acknowledgments page, I have two I call them the Hall of Fame of people that influenced my life, and they're all older people. And then on the very last page, that's how I begin the book, with the older people that I acknowledge. These are the guys that gave me wisdom. And on the last page, I say, if you think I have wisdom beyond years, I do, because I had older people that had wisdom that poured it into me at a young age.
Well said. Again, we've talked about the importance of mission. We've talked about the importance of being around people that are not like you. But also, we need to talk about these various venues where that takes place. Because, again, not only do we tend to get in groups that are just like us, we also tend to apply biblical principles only in small areas. In our family, maybe in our church, we don't take it out into the workaday world, do we? So that's another kind of theme that runs through this book.
Yeah, and I pointed this so many times. I'm actually listening to the book right now. I love the audio book of it. Since it's so story-based, it's very easy to listen to. And I was like, man, Grant, I really did talk so much about discipleship, more in the sense of just follow them into their life. And a lot of it, I think, in this generation that's extremely fatherless, is into their family life.
Yes.
Some of the most impactful areas is just seeing a really, really good husband and a really, really good father. Someone who's pursuing the heart of his wife still, even though it's been 20 years of marriage. And someone who's pursuing the heart of their kids, which is extremely hard, because I know there's that part when the kid changes and he's like, Dad, I don't care. Like, how was your day? Oh, good, good. it's hard to work with. And so I give a lot of props to the older men that I saw, like, okay, they came up with creative questions, or for men, I've seen them take them hunting or take them on activities. Raymond Harris, who mentors me, we run together. So it's something about doing something together and then bringing up this discussion kind of leads to different conversations. And so there's this fear of like, I'm not qualified to disciple. I don't know enough about the Bible. But when I shared the story of when I asked Tony Evans, who I think is one of the most qualified to disciple and incredible Bible teachers, when I say, what's the most influential thing you did with your kids? All his kids are unbelievable.
They really are.
Like every single one is not just
Sterling.
they're kind of doing something, they're nationally, if not internationally, doing something, 100% of them. And so I asked him, thinking, man, he's got to have a great answer of his intentional. And I was like, surely he probably did great devotionals every morning, every night. But he said, the thing I did was the table. I did the table really well. Lunch, dinner, but especially dinner. Every night we were intentional with the Bible around the table.
We're going to talk a little bit about asking questions. You know, Jesus asked a lot of questions, and that's important. I've learned from Grant, one of the questions you don't ask your kid is, you got enough money for college? Let's see if we can come up with better ones right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Jonas Yoder was a member of the Old Order Amish living in the state of Wisconsin. Yoder and others lived carefully according to their religious tradition in a community with other Amish and away from the influence of the modern world. After the 8th grade, Old Order Amish school children do not continue to high school where much is taught in variance with their Amish way of life. Instead, the children return to the home where they are instilled with the virtues of goodness, wisdom, and community welfare by their family. But these families ran into a problem as they sought to live out their religion that had motivated their families since the 16th century. The state of Wisconsin required students to attend school through at least the high school age of 16. Yoder's case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States that held that the state of Wisconsin could not compel these Amish families to send their children to high school. According to the court, only those interests of the highest order and those not otherwise served can overbalance legitimate claims to the free exercise of religion. Wisconsin v. Yoder was among the first cases that helped articulate an important balancing test that weighed a state's interest in governing against an individual's right to the free exercise of religion. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
The Passion Generation, again, it is published by Zondervan, the seemingly reckless, definitely disruptive, and far from hopeless millennials. Grant Skeldon with us. Also with Ryan Casey Waller's been on the program with us before. It is published by Zondervan. I just think a book would be very helpful. Let's also point them to another website, your personal website, because if people want to contact you, that would be a great resource for them to have as well.
Yeah, totally. For any speaking engagements, for any content, if you want to look at more into the book, it's going to be just my name, grantskeldon.com. And also, if you want to follow me online at Twitter, Instagram, luckily I'm the only Grant Skeldon in the world, so it's just at
we have that
Grant
on the screen
Skeldon.
there. So again, we have that for Facebook and everything, and we'll also go to Grant Skeldon, which is SKELDON.com, and you should be able to find it because we have his name there as well, and so that would be a great contact point as well. Now, you did say that we aren't supposed to use this as a curriculum, but let's just be honest. I think the way in which you've put this together, this really could be an opportunity to use this to get into the Bible study. So after your disclaimer about, okay, I don't want to turn this into a curriculum, nevertheless, the way this is put together, especially when you could cut and paste some of these and use them in slides or overheads and things like that, this is perfect to really begin to challenge individuals about discipleship, right?
Yeah, I say that it does create a template. There's a quote in there from Erasmus where he said something to the effect, and he was thinking about the Word of God. Apparently, back then they thought, the Catholic Church thought, we can't give the everyday person the Word of God. They won't know what to do with it. They'll misread it. They'll misinterpret it. And he really hated that. He said, we should never think that God didn't write the Word of God, where he said a theologian could understand it and a kindergartner could basically understand it. And he said farmers should be able to read it. Mothers should be able to read it. Workers should be able to read it. And in the same way, I wanted to create a template that it didn't matter if you were a senior pastor, if you were a volunteer, if you were a CEO, or if you were a janitor, if you were a college student, if you were a high school kid, you could have this template. And so I say it's a lot more of a map than a menu. And so everyone could invite someone to follow them. And so my definition for discipleship is simply frequently following someone who is spiritually a step ahead.
That's very, very good. I mentioned this issue of questions, and one of the things I appreciate about the fact is we'd had this conversation with Ryan Casey Waller. Matter of fact, last week I had a guest, and off the air we were talking about how many times does Jesus ask questions, and I think your estimate is Jesus asked over 300 questions in the Gospels, and I love the next part. Most of the teachings we have from Christ aren't from his flashy new sermon series. I love that. They're from the disciples constantly asking him questions. So if the way in which Jesus preached the gospel and talked about the kingdom and the way in which he discipled believers or future believers was with questions, it seems to me that we need to be a lot better about asking questions, right?
Yeah, we got to ask the question, do we want Jesus as our Lord and Savior and role model, or just as our Lord and Savior? Because we really have to ask ourselves, do we believe Jesus' way still works? And if we do believe it, then we've got to make some major shifts towards discipleship. It does say a lot. Most church experiences I go to, no matter how diverse they are, I always joke that they kind of end like this. This pastor finishes the sermon, and then some other pastor comes up, and he says, guys, wasn't that an incredible message? You guys, next week, we're going to have a new series, and you can't miss it. You got to be there. There's something about this that makes us want to be there. And he's like, it's going to be this series. There's going to be this speaker. Don't miss it. And so you come next week, maybe come 4 weeks in a row, and then they'll do this again at the end of the sermon. Guys, wasn't that an incredible message? You don't want to miss next week. It's going to be an incredible new series, a new speaker. You don't want to miss it. And so if you really think about it, every group has a call to action. Every commercial has a call to action. And what it can come to for church is, if I was a millennial, I would think, well, wow, it seems like church has been dwindled down to two people doing two things for about 2 hours, the worship leader and then the pastor. And then they invite you to come back to listen to the worship leader and the pastor. And at best, you can bring your friends. And I just think, again, that that's not compelling to a generation that sees a broken and dying world on fire, and then comes back to this church full of firemen, if you will, and saying, guys, you don't want to miss it. Next week, all the firemen are going to come together. And we have to go and see most of our generation does not know the Lord and is so depressed and struggling with comparison and aimlessness. And so there's this idea of or this point where it's like, when are we going to look more like the book of Acts? And that's why I said in the book is, my generation's tired of hearing about Acts, the book, without seeing Acts in our life. And so, again, the church is the hope of the world, and the gospel through the people of God, the church, is the hope of the world. We just got to get back to what God's called us to be.
And that's why I see that some people tell me that they are probably closer to people in their small group or their mini church or their whatever it might be than they are to their family members, because it's the one place where that interaction takes place. Now, I've been in even big studies where sometimes at the end we'll ask, okay, we'll ask some questions. What did you get out of this or something? So there's some kind of feedback, but most of the time it's in the smaller groups, which was true about Jesus. He spoke to the large groups, but most of the time he's discipling the 12 or the 3 or whatever. And so in some respects, that's where I think a lot of that growth takes place as well, where you then can ask some questions. There's authenticity. There's accountability, there's transparency, and that's what your generation is looking for, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a wake-up call to this myself, because I realized I was on this trajectory to try. I wasn't thinking this, and I would never write it down or maybe say it, but I realized I was on the trajectory to I wanted to be a strong Christian leader. And what I realized is being a strong Christian leader, what it was displayed as to me was to maybe start your own church, to grow that church, maybe to have several campuses of that church, but you really make it once you become a conference speaker and you're traveling all over the world talking about how others can grow their church. And there's that, everyone that does that is good. I do that myself. And so I'm not saying that's bad. I had a guy one day say, he was at a conference speaking. He was like, look, if you're just trying to build a huge church and you think it's going to be awesome, you can share, maybe write a book, everything ironically I'm doing now. And he said, that's great. But he said, if you do all that, he said, it's possible in our generation to basically to impress Christians, but not look like Jesus. And it really impacted me. He kept saying that, are you trying to impress Christians? Or are you trying to look like Jesus? And that's when I really thought of, what if I looked at Jesus's model? Do I look like Jesus? Do I do what he does? And his biggest thing is, are you actually discipling anyone while you're doing that? So I would say, you can do that all day. But I want the conference speaker to disciple. I want the CEO to disciple. I want the mother to disciple, college student to disciple. I'm not trying to say change what you do. I'm just saying disciple while you do it.
Well, again, you even have kind of some very powerful questions, even pointed questions about pastors and how they surround themselves with like-minded people and those kinds of things. That whole celebrity culture is something that you warn against as well. And again, if we want to be effective, we need to be more like Jesus, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, it says a lot that Jesus would leave 5,000 people. I mean, we're in Dallas where there's always a new event coming to the city that's like, we're going to get thousands of people, which ironically in this city is like, hey, everyone's doing that these days. And two things, actually. It should show that getting thousands of people into a room together doesn't change the city, because if it did, Dallas, Texas should be radically different than every other city, because we get so many people to church on Sunday. 2, what about Jesus getting the thousands, the 5,000, which that was just the men, so it's probably 10, some say 20,000 people. What about, why would Jesus leave all those people to get and continue with the 12, leave on a boat and just leave them behind? And so it's not that they're not important. We got the Sermon on the Mount, but more important is discipleship.
Grant Skeldon with us. And again, if you want to go to his website, that's a place where you can find some great information. The book is entitled The Passion Generation. I'm just so thrilled that it's come out, and I appreciate you giving me an hour today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me, Kerby.
We're going to take a break, and then tomorrow we'll get back into some of the issues in the news. Of course, we have our roundtable discussion, and we'll certainly focus on some of that then. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Also to Stephanie. We'll take a break. See you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.